Story number 1. There's a point in the forest where voices don't echo. They fold. They change direction. They come from everywhere and nowhere. And the night practices throwing them back at you. This was in 2019 when I was 21. I was spending the summer at my parents' house and treating their woods like a loan I'd never repay. I figured I'd go camping in the woods in their backyard because my hands needed a fire and my head needed quiet. This was a pretty impulsive trip. I just decided one morning I'd pack my bag and head out for the night. I'd done it a bunch of times before, and nothing in the backyard had ever tried to talk back. I let my parents know where I was headed, promised to be smart, and let the trees take me. What followed wasn't a campout. It was a reminder. The woods don't love you. They merely allow you until someone else decides you don't belong. I left at late afternoon to find a spot for the night. I walked for a good hour before finding an open area that looked nice enough. I got my tent set up, cleared out a space, and lit up a small campfire. It was really cozy, and the sun slowly setting made it even better. Smoke drew lines into the gold. Sap snapped like a metronome. I ate the silence with both hands. Then a thread tugged at the edge of things. A voice. A male voice, sort of muttering or talking. It wasn't a shout. It almost felt like it was echoing a bit, though, because it was hard to pinpoint exactly where the voice was coming from. The shadows broke into ribs between trunks. Every rib felt like a mouth. These woods behind my parents' place were pretty vast and unexplored. No marked trails, no weekend joggers, so running into someone would have to be very coincidental. I thought, okay, a hiker, a hunter, someone lost, but the voice didn't move. I continued hearing the voice for probably 5 minutes, like a record caught on a groove. Eventually, I called out, just yelling hello, and before the word cleared my tongue, the voice cut out. The forest was now silent. That silence came with teeth. With only a thin rind of light left, I decided I would just move spots. The way you move from a bad feeling. Quickly, within a couple minutes, pack what burns and carry what doesn't. I should have felt better. I didn't. New spot. Basically, just among all the trees. No meadow, no friendly open sky. I set my shelter tighter, reset the ritual, built up another small campfire. Let the glow explain the rules again. S'mores are therapy for cowards and saints. I made a few s'mores and hung around the fire for a good long while. Several hours at least. The marshmallows blistering skin. The chocolate surrendering. Those little melting negotiations took my mind off the earlier wrongness. When I started letting the fire sink down, the woods offered a reminder. I heard the crunch of leaves behind me. I thought it sounded like somewhere to the back left of my campsite. The darkness held its breath. Again, I called out. A man stepped out of the woods and into the light. Not from where the sound lived, but from where I wasn't looking. He said, with a smile, he didn't mean to scare you, and sat, uninvited, like he'd paid for the seat. He held his hands out to warm them by the fire. No pack, no headlamp, no hello that meant hello. I tried the door, labeled normal. Can I help you? I think you're at the wrong campsite. No? Just that. I didn't know which part he was saying no to. Hospitality or reality? We sat in a silence, loud enough to trip over. My brain started to invent exits. I took the worst one. Do you happen to be the one I heard talking out in the trees around my other campsite earlier? The man stayed looking at the fire, but his face visibly fell flat. Must have been someone else, he said, with a much colder, monotone voice, the kind of voice that doesn't bother to lie well. Then the woods spoke, where my skin already knew they would. A stick cracked behind me. From the same spot to the back left of the campsite. That earlier sound had been a mark, not a mistake. The man wasn't alone. Someone else was here. He stared at me with a cold and dead look that turned the fire into decoration. I instantly sprung up from my chair and made a dead sprint into the trees. And the trees, bless them, remembered me. I heard one of the men say something. A snapped order. And then footsteps running up behind me. But fear gives you old gifts. I let the little kid map in my feet take over. The wrought soft log that bridges the ditch. The deer path that looks like nothing unless you've bled on it. The dip where the rain sits and the ground betrays you. My lamp was memory. My compass was the way the road hums farther than the crickets. As I got deeper into the woods and into the darkness, I lost them. I cut left where a creek becomes only sound, climbed blind, counted breaths, and to the road, tasting asphalt like salvation, following it back to my parents' house. They opened the door in night clothes and questions. I didn't have answers worth saying. I had the shape of a second man, and the way the first one said, no. They called a 911 for me. Long story short, I led a team of officers to the campsite in the morning. Everything was gone. My tent, chair, food bag, even the half-burnt stick with a sugar scar. No ash pile, no imprint, like the spot had healed overnight and spit me out as infection. I don't know if that makes things better or worse. On one hand, it could have meant they were just there to rob me. But on the other hand, it made it definite that they had bad intentions, because thieves don't erase a place. After all, one of them did chase me for a minute. Predators tidy. Men who mean harm don't leave questions that point at them. Here's what I don't tell at family dinners. When we stood there with badges and daylight, a tiny wind went through the pines in a straight line, like a finger across lips. Shh. The officer beside me said the usual things. Check cameras, report anything strange. But his eyes did the math. No tracks, no trash, no sign of the second man's stage left. I've learned that sometimes the only proof something was wrong is that you survived. Part 4. Rules I kept. Shouldn't surprise anyone to say I never went back in those woods behind my parents' house. Not alone, not lightly, not with sugar. I keep new rules now. If a voice in the trees stops because you notice it, leave. You weren't supposed to hear the rehearsal. If a stranger sits like he belongs, believe him. He belongs to something. If the noise is back left, the threat is front right. The forest throws sound like a curveball. Don't ask questions that tell the wrong people what you know. Curiosity isn't brave. It's loud sometimes. When sleep gets thin, I still feel the way the night tightened when I said hello. I taste the distance between a campfire and a man who thinks your chair is his. I remember how the ground under my shoes turned into childhood, how every scar on a tree became a sign that said this way. The woods haven't changed. I have. And maybe that's the point. Out there, your plans mean less than someone else's intentions. Out there, a single word, no, can open or close a life. I go light now. I choose camps with other people's laughter on the wind. I keep a whistle next to the lighter, a headlamp on the brim, and my back to no path I didn't make myself. And if the forest ever folds a voice around me again, I won't call back. I'll listen once, and then I'll move, quiet, fast, and grateful for the kind of memory that can still outrun men. Story number 2. You don't realize how loud silence can be until you're 30 miles from the nearest road. It was the middle of summer, and being an avid backpacker and camper, I'd heard from one of my buddies about old fire lookouts that you could rent. Apparently, they were retired lookout stations, usually in the middle of nowhere, miles and miles into the forest. Most people picked the easier ones, reachable by dirt road or short trail. I picked the opposite, the most isolated one I could find. There was only a single picture I could find of it, though, and it was super old and blurry. So really, I had no clue what to expect. That should have been my first warning. But isolation sounded like peace, and I thought I could handle peace. I brought my usual backpacking gear and started the hike at 9:00 a.m. There wasn't much out there as far as views go. Not for the first few hours. It was just very dense, harsh forest terrain. The trail wasn't even much of a trail anymore, just a very rough path. 5 hours later, I caught sight of it. The lookout tower, perched high on a mountain ridge like a forgotten tooth. It wasn't the tall, elegant kind on metal stilts. It looked more like a small cabin raised 10 feet off the ground. The hike was definitely worth it just for the view alone. Felt like I could see the whole world from there. The building, though, was half decayed. Planks gray and splintered, windows clouded, patches of repair scattered like bandages. I climbed the 20 narrow steps to the wraparound deck, the stairs groaning under my boots. Inside, bare wooden floor, 4 windows, nothing else. Not glamorous, but it would do. I made food, stretched out on the ledge, watched the sun sink into a blur of red and violet. The wind thinned into a whisper. For a while, I thought, this might be perfect. By nightfall, I was half asleep in my sleeping bag, counting the creaks of old wood. Then came the footsteps, before I could even get up and look. There were clear footsteps coming up the stairs. I hurried out of my sleeping bag and up to the door, which notably had no locks on it. The steps stopped. A man came around the corner. He was older, say late 40s, and had longish blonde hair. Somehow, he wasn't startled when he saw me, almost like he knew I was already up here. "Great place to stay a few nights, isn't it?" he said, grinning and walking up closer to me. The grin didn't reach his eyes. I told him I'd rented it for the next 3 nights. His smile didn't change, just twitched slightly. "Actually," he said, "I was hoping to be staying here tonight." Something about the way he said "hoping" made my skin tighten. I lied, said a friend was hiking up right behind me, and that we couldn't fit anyone else. The grin faded. A pause, then a curt nod. He turned and headed back down the stairs. When he reached the forest floor, I saw it clearly. No backpack, no gear, nothing. Just his hands swinging loosely as he disappeared into the trees. The night felt heavier after that. I tried to stay awake, listening for more steps, but exhaustion won. When dawn came, I brewed coffee and convinced myself it had just been some hiker lost on his way. Then, at the base of the stairs, I saw the note, a small piece of paper pinned to the railing, fluttering in the wind. It said, "Sorry." Just that, the word "sorry," and a drawn, smiley face. If he left it, that meant he'd come back while I was sleeping. The thought rooted deep in my gut, but leaving meant 5 hours of hiking down unmarked trail. And the daylight was beautiful, almost warm enough to make me doubt myself. So I stayed. I stayed up much later than I did the night before. I had this small battery-powered lantern that I hung up on the wall so I could see a little better. The forest below looked endless, a black sea that swallowed light whole. Every window reflected my own face back at me. It must have been close to midnight when I finally grabbed the lantern and climbed down the steps to relieve myself near the tree line. The air was damp and cold enough to sting. I saw something move in front of me. Just a glimpse of something shift out of the dim light from my lantern. Someone there? Nothing. Just the forest breathing. I basically ran back to the lookout. It didn't feel much safer in there, though. Windows covered every inch of the walls, and like I mentioned before, the door didn't even have a lock on it. The lantern hung against the wall, its light bleeding out into the dark. From below, the tower's staircase looked like a spine descending into nothing. I could see the bottom of the stairs, though, so that's what I was focusing on, making sure nobody tried to come up. Minutes bled together. My reflection in the glass started to look like someone else. Then movement, just a shadow at first. There was a man at the bottom of the stairs. He was standing right at the first step, staring at it like he was just waiting there. I could barely breathe. He didn't move, didn't call out, just watched. I must have been at the window, watching him for for 2 whole minutes before the man finally moved. He took a couple steps back, pausing for a moment, then walked off. He disappeared behind the walkway where I couldn't see. Maybe into the woods, maybe not. Either way, I knew it was him. The same blonde hair, the same slow smile. That's when I made the decision. I was leaving. Right now. I waited a few minutes. Then I grabbed my bag and quietly walked down the steps into the surface below the lookout tower. I can't even describe how unnerved I was walking away from the tower and into the dark forest, knowing there was a chance the guy was still watching me, impossibly following me into the trees. I walked fast, knife in one hand, lantern in the other. Every sound magnified, branches snapping, leaves whispering like voices. By then, the sun had come up, though, and I was able to finish the hike and leave the forest. When I finally reached the ranger station, I didn't tell them everything, just that there was someone hanging around the tower who didn't belong there. But one thing has haunted me since. I'd told that man I'd rented the tower for 3 nights, which means he likely thought I'd be there for the 3rd night. So, had I not left early and actually stayed for the 3rd night, things might have taken a much more disturbing turn. Sometimes I still dream I'm back on that mountain, waking to the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs, slow and deliberate, until they stop right outside the door. And this time, the note doesn't say sorry. It says, "Too late." Story number 3. The Alaska Highway looks beautiful on postcards. Mountains in every direction, pine forests, and silence thick enough to hear your pulse. But out there, silence can mean something's listening back. I was driving from northern Montana all the way up to Alaska. 2 months of solitude, camping out of a converted SUV, chasing the idea of freedom. The main goal was to drive the Alaska Highway. It was more than a road. It was a test of how much emptiness a person could stand. This road was famous for a reason. It went through the western portion of Canada and was very desolate and rough. There were gas stations every few hundred miles, and that was about it. I knew that beforehand, so I came in as prepared as possible. The only thing that made me uneasy wasn't the cold or the wilderness. It was that I couldn't bring a firearm, because I had to drive through Canada. I couldn't bring any firearm with me. Normally, I'd have one tucked under the seat for peace of mind. Now I had only a flashlight, a knife, and a prayer. The first day went perfectly. I got in a good 8 hours of driving. The second would test me in ways no map could warn about. By sundown, exhaustion and monotony blurred together. I pulled off on the next campsite I saw, just a dirt clearing ringed by trees. It just looked like forest all around me, and nobody else was there. I parked, put up my window shades, and fell asleep to the hum of insects. Morning came cool and clean. I brewed coffee on a camp stove and decided to stretch my legs. Right when I stepped outside, I noticed a trail, so I decided to follow it. It wandered maybe 5 minutes before opening onto another campsite. Something about it felt wrong. It was scrappy and rugged. Clearly, someone had been there recently, and it sort of looked like they left in a hurry. Half of their stuff was missing, and the other half was torn up and thrown across the site. I didn't linger. After only being there for 30 seconds, I turned around and headed back. Instinct, not logic. When I got back, my heart stopped. There was now a truck parked right up next to my car. It was an all-black pickup truck with tinted windows. No sound, no movement. It felt like a set piece in someone else's story. Nobody was outside of it, so I assumed they were inside, watching me. I climbed into my driver's seat, pretending not to notice the engine ticking faintly in the cold. With the strange campsite and the sudden truck parked near me, out in the middle of such an isolated road, I just left right away. The rear view mirror held the shape of that truck until the trees erased it. I drove for 3 to 4 hours straight after leaving that campsite until I got to the next gas station. The world out there was massive, but somehow claustrophobic. The kind of quiet that eats your thoughts. This gas station looked very old and only had one double-sided pump. Nobody else was there. I stepped out, started filling up, and let the mountain air numb the unease. Then, in the distance, a truck came down the road. Black, familiar. As it got closer, I was almost sure it was the same black truck I'd seen at the campsite. My pulse raced. I tried to look casual, like this was normal. My stomach tightened when they pulled into the gas station and right up to the other side of the pump. It made sense. They needed gas too. But it still felt a little strange. Why would they have pulled into the campsite and only stayed there for a few minutes just to leave right after I did? I forced my eyes forward. Thankfully, I was done in 30 seconds getting back in and driving off. I never saw the guy. He never got out of the truck or showed himself. Just glass, reflecting sky. The kind of anonymity that makes you realize how easily people disappear out here for hours. I pushed the car through long ribbons of road, each curve a question mark. I felt good knowing now that my tank was full. I'd be driving non-stop for a while, likely putting a ton of distance between us. I drove a long while, pretty much until I noticed the sun start coming down. Then I found a decent spot to pull off. This one felt safer. The trail sort of nestled away in the brush, and there weren't any signs of anyone having been here recently. Still, I kept seeing that black truck when I blinked. I felt a lot more safe here than I did before. I really wanted to set up my tent and have a nice outdoor campsite. But my gut whispered, no. So, I just made food outside and enjoyed the nature until sundown, then got back in my car. The night felt endless. I scrolled through videos I'd downloaded, the glow of the screen comforting. I was there, awake, for probably 4 hours. I felt very comfortable there, and was actually really excited to be getting into Alaska tomorrow morning. Then, a sound around 11 p.m. I heard something outside my car. Soft, deliberate, human. even from just a second of listening. I was 100% sure it was a person walking. I froze. That kind of silence means someone's thinking too. I looked toward the side window. A man's face was pressed up against the glass, staring in at me. The scream that left me was silent. I jolted back, losing my breath from the instant fear. They also moved back, disappearing into the void of darkness just past the window. I immediately jumped up to the front seat, seeing the second guy that I'd heard walking running up to the car. He smashed open the back window just as I got to the front. Glass exploded inward. Panic tunneled my vision. My adrenaline flowing made it hard to do the simple task of getting my keys out and starting the car. One of them was sticking their arm through the broken window to try opening the door from the inside. I slammed the gas the moment the key turned, right as he opened the back door. I floored the car. Tires clawed gravel. Adrenaline replaced oxygen as I tore through the dark. My headlights caught it. That same black truck parked off the path, sort of hidden in the bushes. They'd been waiting. I didn't look back for miles. My rearview mirror was filled only with my own terror after what felt like forever. I pulled off to close the back door that was still hanging open and to call the police with what little cell service I had. My hands shook too much to type the area code right. Obviously, out in the middle of nowhere. It took forever, and the men were probably long gone. When the dispatcher's voice finally came through, it sounded impossibly far away, as though she were calling into the forest, not from outside it. I never got their license plate, and it was too dark to get any facial features. So it was a lost cause. The next day, sunlight looked fake, too soft for what had happened. I drove the remaining miles like a ghost, still ending up making it to Alaska and enjoying the rest of my trip after repairing the window. That's the funny part. You can fix glass. You can't fix how you flinch at every passing truck. What both of those men intended that night is left to speculation. But I know this. They didn't just choose a random traveler. They followed me for 2 days through a country that felt too big for anyone to care. I prefer to not even think about it. But sometimes, when I'm driving a lonely road and the headlights catch a set of tinted windows ahead, I find myself checking the mirrors just to be sure I'm still alone.